What if history itself began with an omission? What if the first civilization we know was not the first at all, merely the first to rise again after something unspeakable had passed? Tonight, as the world outside falls into its slow rhythm, let that question settle somewhere deep in your mind. Because the story of Sumer, the story of beginnings, is haunted by the silence that came before it. So, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. And as always, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I want to imagine you wherever the night finds you as we drift together into the forgotten dawn of civilization. The textbooks tell us that Sa rising in the fertile plains between the Tigris and Euphrates was the first civilization on Earth. The first to build cities, the first to write, the first to measure time, to name the stars, to record laws and contracts, the first to leave behind something that resembles us, organized, complex, deliberate, yet for all their precision, for all their ununiform tablets and brick temples, there is something profoundly strange about how suddenly they appeared. Around 4000 BCE, the archaeological record becomes crowded, not with slow evolution, but with a sudden blooming of order. It's as if someone had pressed resume after a long pause. Before that moment, there is darkness. Millennia of scattered tribes, half-erased tools, cave symbols we can't quite read. Then almost overnight, people begin irrigating the desert, building ziggurats, aligning temples to solstices, writing down the language of gods. The question that lingers is simple. How does such complexity emerge from nothing? Civilizations don't rise in a vacuum. They inherit, they remember. But what exactly was remembered before Sumer? Archaeology, for all its discipline, struggles with absence. It can only measure what remains, not what was lost. Beneath the layered sands of Mesopotamia, there is a horizon beyond which our instruments cannot yet see. An older world drowned in flood sediments, shaken by the end of an ice age. A world that might have known things before the story was allowed to begin. There are traces of it in myths, in stones, in inexplicable ruins, far older than they should be. And every trace seems to whisper the same defiant truth that Sumer may not have been the beginning, but the recovery. Consider this. Even the Sumerians themselves said they were not first. Their own records, the king list, the Enuma Elish, the hymns to Enki and Enlil, speak of a time before kings, before Uruk, before floodwaters reshaped the world. They spoke of antediluvian cities, of those who came before the waters. According to their myths, civilization was not invented, it was restored. The gods did not teach humanity from scratch. They returned to retouch what had been forgotten. How could such an idea persist so strongly if there were no memory behind it? In the 20th century, archaeologists began unearthing sites that made the official timeline uneasy. Göbekli in southeastern Turkey, 12,000 years old, built 6,000 years before Sumer. Its carved pillars arranged in circles, depicting animals no longer found in the region. Its builders, we are told, had no agriculture, no cities, no writing. And yet they cut, transported, and raised stones weighing tons. They oriented them toward celestial events. They buried the site deliberately, as if to hide it from time. Who were they hiding it from? Or what? The Sumerians had their own flood story, the tale of Zusudra, later echoed by Utnapishtim, and then Noah. It tells of a great deluge sent to cleanse the earth. of knowledge preserved in secret of survival by a chosen few. Modern geology shows that around 9600 BCE, sea levels rose catastrophically as the last glaciers melted. Entire coastlines vanished. River valleys flooded. Islands disappeared. What if that was the real event behind the myth? And what if before the waters came, there were cities, coastal, luminous, now buried beneath silt and sea? The sea keeps its secrets well off the coasts of India, Japan, and the Mediterranean. Sonar scans have revealed symmetrical structures on the seabed, steps, columns, roads swallowed by time. Each discovery is followed by debate, skepticism, silence. The official narrative adjusts just enough to absorb the anomaly, but the pattern remains. Something once existed, then vanished, then was rewritten as legend. When the Sumerians emerged, they did so already equipped, not only with irrigation, but with astronomy. Their earliest tablets show knowledge of Jupiter, Venus, the precession of equinoxes, cycles that require centuries of observation. How could a newly formed culture measure the heavens with such calm familiarity? Did they rediscover it? Or were they guided by remnants of an older order? Perhaps by survivors, wanderers from the previous world, carrying fragments of language and star maps across generations until they found fertile ground again. There is another silence too, one that lingers not in earth, but in thought. Our collective memory of deep prehistory has gaps that feel intentional, as if the story was pruned to begin at a convenient point. Every calendar, every chronology, every before Christ and after Christ depends on the assumption that civilization had a clean start. But the soil disagrees. Beneath the layers of myth, there are rhythms of forgetting and remembering, as though history itself breathes in cycles, exhaling knowledge and then inhaling amnesia. Some scholars once dismissed all this as coincidence, the human tendency to find patterns in chaos. But new data has forced the question to reopen. Ancient DNA studies, carbonated cave art, and linguistic archaeology reveal migrations and connections far older than the accepted narrative allows. There were complex networks of trade before recorded history. There were cultural echoes across continents that should never have met. Even the roots of language seem to point backward into a fog that refuses to lift. So what if the Sumerians did not start the story, but merely resumed it? What if they were the inheritors of a memory too fragile to survive the flood of millennia? In their tablets, they described the gods descending to teach humans how to measure, how to write, how to build. But maybe those gods were ancestors, not divine, but advanced. A civilization so old it became myth itself. And if that were true, then what else have we mistaken for beginnings? Perhaps our entire sense of progress from chaos to order is built upon ruins we no longer recognize. Perhaps what we call the first is only what we could find after the world's last erasia. The desert winds still move softly across the ruins of Uruk and Eridu, stirring the dust of cuneiform tablets that once told of kings and floods and gods. But beneath that dust lies something older still, a quiet that predates language, a memory waiting for a voice. What if that silence before history wasn't emptiness, but the faint echo of a civilization that remembered too much and was therefore allowed to remain only in myth? There is a place where stone speaks older than words, and where history itself seems to hesitate before entering. Deep in the hills of southeastern Turkey, buried beneath 12,000 years of soil, stands a temple complex so ancient, so deliberate, that it defies the entire structure of our historical memory. Göbekli Tepe, a name that sounds less like a location and more like a pulse from a time we were never meant to remember. It was discovered in the 1990s by accident. A farmer's plow struck something unyielding, a curved slab. When archaeologists brushed away the dirt, they uncovered a circle of stones taller than any human, carved with animals, foxes, vultures, snakes, and symbols that no one alive today can read. We told that in 9600 BCE, humans were still hunter-gatherers, nomads moving with herds, guided by survival, not architecture. Yet here at Göbekli Tepe, they built a structure so complex that it would not be matched for millennia. They carved pillars weighing up to 20 tons, shaped limestone with tools supposedly too primitive for the task, and arranged them in concentric circles aligned with stars and solstices. The oldest temples on Earth were not built after agriculture. They were built before it. That simple fact rewrites everything. How can people without cities, without farms, without metallurgy, create a sanctuary that whispers of cosmic order? Some archaeologists, uneasy with that question, have suggested Göbekli was built by a religious cult of hunter-gatherers. But the theory feels like an attempt to contain something that will not be contained, because religion too implies abstraction, memory, hierarchy, myth, things that belong to civilization. The stones are not random. Each one carries an expression, a gesture frozen in rock. Some depict arms, hands, belts, as if they represent beings, not humans, but intermediaries. In the center of each circle, two tall T-shaped monoliths face each other like sentinels. They're not idols. They're witnesses to what no one can say. In the stillness of the site, you can almost hear the wind as it drifts through the broken lintels, carrying the sound of something both familiar and forgotten. The carvings of wild animals, or the fox, the crane, the scorpion, are not mere decoration. They correspond to constellations. The vulture with outstretched wings mirrors Cygnus, the celestial bird. The scorpion recalls Scorpius poised below the Milky Way. These alignments suggest observation, not superstition. A map of the heavens carved before writing existed. But how did they know where to look? How did they measure time before calendars, or trace the sky before telescopes? And perhaps most unsettling of all, after centuries of use, they buried it. Not destroyed, not abandoned, but deliberately covered layer by layer with care. A ritual of concealment so complete that the site remained hidden until our century. It is as if they wanted to ensure that the message would not be found until the world was ready to ask the right questions. Who buries their own temples unless those temples were never meant for the age that followed? Some researchers see Göbekli Tepe as a surviving fragment from a lost world, a culture that existed before the Younger Dryas catastrophe, when melting glaciers and torrential rains transformed continents. The cataclysm that ended the Pleistocene would have destroyed settlements near coasts and rivers, the very places where life thrived. Survivors would have carried memories not of stories, but of architecture, of sky, of ritual. If so, Göbekli might be a reconstruction, a last echo built by the descendants of a civilization, erased by flood and fire, the first seed of remembrance after forgetting. The same story repeats itself in whispers elsewhere. In the Levant, the ruins of Jericho, walls and towers dated to around 9000 BCE. In Anatolia, Satal Huruyuk, a city of mud brick homes painted with images of bulls and hunters older than Sumer. Across the globe, the pattern reappears. Sudden complexity appearing out of nowhere without evolution or precedent. It's as though humanity woke from a collective sleep, remembering something it was never meant to forget. The excavation reports of Göbekli read almost like poetry of confusion. Archaeologists speak of precision beyond expectation. The builders seem to have known geometry, symmetry, and structural balance. Yet no tools have been found, no villages nearby, no trace of how they lived. It is as if they appeared, built, and vanished, leaving only the stones as proof that they were real. Klaus Schmidt, the German archaeologist who led the excavation until his death, once said that Göbekli Tepe was the first cathedral on Earth. But he also admitted something else quietly, that its builders were not beginners. They were remembering something older. The surrounding landscape, when seen from above, forms patterns, ridges, and hollows that align with cardinal directions. Some researchers suspect the site was part of a vast network with smaller enclosures extending outward, like satellites around a forgotten center. Satellite imagery reveals geometric arrangements under the soil too regular to be natural. Could Go have been one node in a global pattern, a constellation of sanctuaries marking the rebirth of civilization after its erasure? If we look deeper into the Sumerian myths, a strange resonance appears. They speak of Eridu, the first city founded by the god Enki before the flood. Archaeologists later found Eridu's ruins, small, simple, nothing like Göbekli. Yet, what if the story of Eridu was not about one city, but about memory itself? The act of refounding what was lost? The priests of Eridu might have inherited whispers from those who built the stone circles of Turkey. Knowledge passed in fragments carried by survivors across epochs. Göbekli Tepe stands today, like an accusation, a gentle one against the timeline we're told to believe. It says that before agriculture, before writing, there was memory, and that memory was written in stone. It says that civilization may not have been a sudden invention, but a recovery, that the human mind did not evolve linearly, from ignorance to reason, but fell from understanding into forgetfulness, only to climb back again. And what if the same hands that carved these pillars once carved others, now lost beneath the waves? What if every ancient temple, every ziggurat and pyramid is only a continuation of that same impulse to preserve cosmic order through form, to leave behind something that might outlast the next forgetting? Standing in the dust of Göbekli, under the dry Anatolian sky, one feels an odd reverence, not for gods, but for memory itself. The stones seem to hum faintly when the wind passes through them, though responding to some forgotten frequency. Perhaps that sound once resonated across continents. Perhaps other temples once answered, and perhaps that is why they buried it. Because the age that followed could not understand. Because the rhythm that guided its creation no longer matched the world that was emerging. They sealed it beneath the earth, like a message in a bottle meant for us. For the age that would one day rediscover it and begin to ask why our own story begins so late. So if Göbekli is not the beginning, then what was it remembering? And if the Sumerians were not the first, then who was the teacher who built in stone before history was allowed to begin again? Somewhere between myth and sediment, between story and silence, lies the memory of a flood that nearly erased the world. It is a story told and retold across every cradle of civilization. A story that always begins the same way, with warning, with water, and with forgetting. In Sumer, it was Zudra who built the boat. In Babylon, Utnapishtim. In Hebrew scripture, Noah. In Greece, Deucalion. In India, Manu. Across the world, cultures separated by oceans somehow remembered the same deluge, the same drowning of time. Was it just coincidence? Or were they all remembering something that truly happened long before Sumer began to write? The Sumerian king list carved into clay nearly 5,000 years ago mentions something strange. It lists the rulers who reigned before the flood, kings whose reigns lasted thousands of years, and then simply says, the flood swept over. After the flood had swept over, kingship descended again from heaven. The line is simple but devastating. It describes an ending so complete that history had to start over. Archaeologists reading those tablets often take the flood as metaphor, a symbolic purification, a mythic restart. But beneath the symbolism, the geology begins to whisper. Around 12,800 years ago, as the last ice age began to end, something catastrophic disturbed the balance of the world. The Younger Deuce, a 1,000-year period of sudden freezing that came just as Earth was warming. Then, just as abruptly, it ended again, melting the glaciers in violent floods. In the meltwater deposits of North America, Greenland, and the Middle East, scientists have found microscopic evidence of high-temperature impacts, glass-like spherules, platinum anomalies, the residue of something that burned the sky. Some call it the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. The idea that a comet or fragmented meteor struck the planet, melting ice sheets, flooding continents, and resetting everything we call civilization. If the theory is true, then the flood remembered by Sumerians was not fiction. It was survival memory, an echo passed down through 100 generations. Sea levels rose by more than 100 meters in a geological instant. Whole coastlines disappeared. Islands became myths. Cities, if they existed, drowned. Those who escaped would have carried their knowledge inland, preserving fragments of language, agriculture, and sky-awe. Perhaps those survivors became the teachers who later reawakened in Sumer, Egypt, and the Indus Valley. The civilizers described in so many ancient myths in Mesopotamia. The flood was said to have come because the gods found humanity too noisy, too restless. The deluge was both punishment and cleansing. Yet in every version, there is always one who is warned, one who preserves the seeds of life, the measures of time, the language of stars. The same pattern appears in the Mayan Pulvu, in Polynesian chants, in North sagas of Amir, and the sea. The flood is never merely about water. It is about erasure, a cosmic reboot that forces memory to start again from fragments. Modern science tells us the Holocene epoch, our current geological age, began after that cataclysm. It was the moment when the chaos of ice gave way to stability, allowing civilization to flourish. But that also means everything before it, whatever existed, was buried under the silence of flood, under the silt of deltas, under the pressure of ocean floors, lie cities we will likely never find. The ruins of Dogland in the North Sea, the submerged terraces off the coast of Japan, the drowned structures in the Gulf of Camby. Each one whispers the same story in a different tongue, that something came before. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim tells the hero, "I will reveal to you a hidden thing." He speaks of the arc of survival, of the gods quarreling over the fate of humankind. But perhaps the real hidden thing is not the arc. It is the continuity of knowledge. After the flood, Utnapishtim was said to live at the mouth of the rivers, far away, immortal in memory, if not in body. Could this image conceal a deeper truth, that those who survived withdrew to the edges of the known world, guarding fragments of what was lost until the world was ready again? Ancient Egypt, too, speaks of Zepte, the first time when gods ruled on earth before the flood. Plato wrote of Atlantis, a civilization destroyed by a single day and night of misfortune, when the sea swallowed it whole. In India, the flood of Manu marks the end of a cosmic cycle, the birth of a new age. These stories do not copy one another. They remember the same wound. Perhaps the reason we find them everywhere is because the survivors carried them everywhere. Because every mountain refuge, every dry plateau where humans resettled, held someone who had seen the water rise. When archaeologists dig through the Mesopotamian layers, they find something striking. Between the ruins of the pre-flood city of Shuruppak and the later levels of Ur and Eridu, there lies a thick band of clay, sterile, water-laid, cutting clean through the strata. The flood layer, not myth, but matter. In that layer, civilization pauses. Above it, new cities rise. The pattern fits the story too well to ignore. The flood was not just destruction, it was amnesia. It washed away the context of memory, leaving only symbols that survived through myth. It turned science into story, architecture into ritual, technology into legend. Perhaps that is why the earliest myths after the flood are obsessed with recovery, with the return of knowledge from the gods. Writing, agriculture, astronomy, all described not as inventions, but as restorations. The gods did not create civilization. They returned it. But who were these gods? Sumerian tablets describe them as beings of the sky descending after the waters receded. The Akalu, sages who emerge from the depths to teach mankind wisdom and measurement. Each one half human, half divine, dwelling between water and air. Could this imagery be the distorted memory of survivors who came from afar? Their technology and knowledge seeming divine to those who had forgotten. If the flood had reset humanity, then even simple metallurgy or navigation would appear miraculous. And yet the flood shadow remains in our language. We speak of rising tides, of cleansing, of rebirth. We measure time in ages as if instinctively knowing that endings are cyclical. Every culture carries that inherited trauma, that echo of loss. It is in our bones, in our myths, in the way we still fear the sea's hunger. If the flood truly reset time, then everything we call ancient is only the most recent layer. Civilization could be far older, but its earlier versions lie sealed beneath oceans. The Sumerians remembered fragments of a world that came before. The stones of Göbekli may have been built to preserve its memory. The myths of every continent might be its scattered language, and we, thousands of years later, might still be speaking its dream without knowing it. What then was drowned that we have never named? What technologies, what sciences, what understanding of nature vanished beneath the silt? And if time can be reset once, could it happen again? Another flood, another forgetting, another civilization forced to begin anew, convinced once more that it was the first. There are maps that should not exist. Maps that remember coastlines long vanished, mountains before their ice, and continents whose true shapes were only rediscovered thousands of years later. The most haunting of these is the Piri Reis map drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral on gazelle skin discovered centuries later in the archives of Istanbul. Its ink has faded, but its lines remain precise, its curves deliberate. And among those lines lies something impossible, a depiction of the coast of Antarctica, drawn not only centuries before its discovery, but seemingly before it was covered in ice. When scholars examined the Piri Reis chart, they noticed details no sailor of the 16th century could have known. The coast of South America extends too far south. The curvature of Africa is almost exact. And below the Atlantic, faint but deliberate, lies a landmass at the southern pole. A landmass that would not be confirmed until the 19th century. When seatographers compared it to modern seismic surveys, they found something even stranger. The shoreline on the map matches the actual continental edge beneath the ice, not the ice shelf itself. Whoever charted it had seen Antarctica as it was more than 10,000 years ago. Piri Reis himself claimed he did not invent the map. He said he compiled it from older sources, 20 charts and 8 world maps. Some from the time of Alexander, others from the days of the ancients. It was a copy of copies, an inheritance. He could not have imagined that those fragments might have been echoes from a forgotten world. If so, then the Piri Reis map is not the beginning of discovery, but the survival of memory. Historians often dismiss the Antarctic portion as coincidence, a misdrawn extension of South America. But coincidences rarely carry such mathematical precision. In 1960, seagrapher Charles Hapgood proposed an unsettling theory that the map preserved a memory of Earth before a sudden pole shift, a costal displacement that moved Antarctica from a temperate latitude to its current frozen position. He believed the map was based on ancient surveys conducted before that shift by a civilization capable of global navigation. Albert Einstein, in a letter to Hapgood, called the idea not impossible. The remark alone has kept the theory alive, a soft ember glowing at the edge of official history. If the Sumerians were the first civilization, why do artifacts like this suggest a deeper knowledge, a grasp of geography, mathematics, and astronomy that should not have existed before them? The Piri Reis map is not alone. The Artius Phaeus map of 1531 also shows Antarctica ice-free with mountain ranges, where modern radar later confirmed they existed. The Batcher map, drawn in 1737, depicts an Antarctic continent, divided by rivers and valleys exactly where subglacial research later found them. Each map claims descent from ancient sources. None of those sources survive. Could there have been an earlier age of exploration? An age when the sea was lower, the air warmer, and humans had already charted the globe? If so, its navigators would have mapped coastlines now drowned beneath post-glacial oceans. They might have encoded their knowledge in ways later civilizations could preserve without understanding. Clay tablets, temple walls, oral myth disguised as cosmology. Consider the story of the world mountain in Sumerian and Babylonian cosmology. A sacred axis surrounded by a circular sea. The same geometry appears in Hindu and Norse myths, in Egyptian temple plans, even in medieval Mapundi. Each depicts a center, a navel of the world, with continents spiraling outward. Could this archetype reflect the echo of an ancient global map, transmuted into spiritual symbolism after the loss of its technical meaning? Ancient maps are not just geography. They are philosophy and ink. They show how people imagined their world or remembered it. In this sense, the Piri Reis chart is a mirror to our forgetting. It forces us to confront the possibility that memory can survive catastrophe, but meaning cannot. The lines endure even when the context that gave them life is gone. In the archives of Topkapi Palace, the surviving fragment of the map is only one piece of a larger world chart. The rest long lost. It is torn along the edges as though time itself had tried to censor it. But even fragments speak. When modern analysts traced its grid lines, they found evidence of a spherical projection, something requiring advanced trigonometry and precise measurements of latitude. How could such mathematics have survived from the age of caravels? Unless it was inherited from a civilization for whom the globe was already familiar, if there were ancient cetographers, true masters of the Earth's contours, who were they? The Egyptians credited the followers of Horus with measuring the world before the Nile kingdoms rose. The Mayan said their ancestors came from across the sea, bringing the calendar and the stars. The Dune of West Africa somehow knew that Sirius was a binary star system long before telescopes confirmed it. These fragments do not prove, but they resonate. They sound like scattered notes of a melody once complete. Perhaps mapping, the act of defining the world, is the oldest human ritual. To draw is to remember. To name is to preserve. When the flood erased coastlines, perhaps the survivors redrew them, clinging to knowledge of what once was. Over generations, precision gave way to myth, and maps became cosmologies. By the time the Sumerians began etching cuneiform, the art of global mapping might already have been a ghost, its last echoes confined to the heavenly tablets of legend. It is tempting to dismiss all this as romantic speculation, but the silence surrounding such anomalies is louder than denial. The official record is built on consistency, on chronology that must hold. Yet every so often, something like the Piri Reis map slips through, and we glimpse a fracture, a glimpse of a world where ancient sailors traced the coasts of continents still unfrozen. If they existed, their maps would not only guide ships, but preserve cosmology, knowledge of latitude, season, and celestial rhythm. They would have read the sky as easily as the sea. And if that knowledge was lost, the Sumerians' sudden mastery of astronomy makes a different kind of sense. Not invention, but recovery. The lines of the Piri Reis chart still arc across the skin of the gazelle hide, dark and patient. They defy the timeline, defy the notion of progress. Each line is a whisper. We were here. We measured the world before you remembered how to count. And so, as we look upon this map drawn 5 centuries ago, a relic of a relic, we must ask, who first taught humanity that the earth could be known? Who measured the horizon before the first temple stone was laid? And what other maps still sleep in forgotten archives, waiting to remind us that the story of exploration did not begin, but return? There are places where the sea does not simply conceal, it remembers. Beneath the waves, silence thickens into a kind of language, one spoken in eroded staircases, in pillars swallowed by coral, in terraces that no natural current could have shaped. The ocean floor, though unseen, carries the faint geometry of something that once belonged to air and sunlight. And sometimes, when the water clears, that geometry speaks. Off the western coast of India, in the murky waters of the Gulf of Cam, sonar scans revealed what should have been impossible. An entire submerged complex stretching for miles, buried under sand and sediment, 12 stars below the surface. The structures formed straight lines and intersections, rectangular foundations too deliberate to be geological. When divers recovered artifacts, pottery shards, beads, carbon samples, the results came back staggering. Some were dated to 9,000 years old, long before Sumer, before Egypt, even before Göbekli was buried. Yet, according to our textbooks, India's first civilization, the Indus Valley, would not arise for another 4,000 years. The ocean floor had preserved something older than history itself. The discovery, first made public in 2001, was met with silence more than excitement. A few Indian archaeologists suggested that the site might represent an ancient city drowned at the end of the last ice age when sea levels rose by nearly 100 millimeters. Others dismissed it as misinterpreted natural formations, a case of wishful seeing. But sonar imagery does not wish. Its lines do not dream. The rectangular grid remained, whispering of streets and courtyards, of walls aligned with forgotten suns. Across the world, in the waters off Yonaguni Island, in Japan, divers encountered another enigma. At 20 kilometers depth lies a massive stone structure. Terraces, steps, columns, and causeways carved into the seabed. Some call it the Yonauni Monument, though it is not a monument in the ordinary sense. Its scale dwarfs the imagination. The platform rises like a submerged ziggurat. Its surface is sharp and angular, as though cut by human design. Its edges align almost perfectly with the cardinal directions. At its base lies what appears to be a roadway. At its summit, a platform shaped like an altar. Geologists argue whether it is natural or man-made, a debate that has lasted decades. Yet within that argument lies an uncomfortable truth. The ocean swallows evidence faster than we can preserve it. Whether Yonauni was carved or merely shaped, it stands at the intersection of nature and intent, a monument to a world that once stood above sea level. Around 10,000 BCE, this region was dry land, a bridge between Japan and Taiwan. Then the waters rose, the ice sheets melted, and whatever stood there was consumed. Ancient myths across Asia remember a flood that ended an age, a deluge that came not gradually, but suddenly, as if the earth had exhaled. The Tamil texts of southern India speak of Kumari Kandam, a vast kingdom swallowed by the Indian Ocean where poets and scholars once lived. The Japanese Kojiki recalls the land below the sea, lost as storms of divine punishment. Even in Polynia, legends describe islands that sank in fire and water. These stories are dismissed as mythology, yet they share uncanny parallels with geological records. Could it be that the ocean itself is our oldest archive, and myth its indexing system? If so, what does it mean that we can now read that archive again? Not with tablets and chisels, but with sonar pulses and remote sensors. The more we scan the seabed, the more symmetrical impossibilities we find. Off the coast of Cuba, divers have mapped enormous stone blocks, arranged in patterns resting at depths that would have been dry land 12,000 years ago. In the Mediterranean near Alexandria, entire quarters of ancient cities lie beneath the harbor, their columns still standing upright in blue shadow. Each discovery rewrites not history, but our relationship to it. It is easy to imagine that time flows like a river, but perhaps it behaves more like the tide, advancing, retreating, covering, and uncovering fragments of itself. The flood that reset time did not erase civilization entirely. It only displaced it. People fled to higher ground, carrying what knowledge they could. The lands, the fertile coasts, where the earlier cities would naturally form, were devoured by the sea. When new civilizations arose, their myths remembered the waters, but not what had stood beneath them. What if the birth of Sumer and the rebirth of civilization was simply the inland echo of a loss too vast to comprehend? What if the cradle of civilization was actually its refuge? The high ground left behind after a maritime world drowned, the precision of early city planning, the sudden emergence of mathematics, the obsession with celestial order. Could these be memories of a culture that once lived by the rhythm of tides and stars? The Sumerians themselves spoke of Areridu as the first city built by the gods upon the edge of the sea. They called their teachers the Abkalu beings, who emerged from the deep to bring knowledge of writing and measurement. Similar figures appear in other traditions. Wants of Babylon, Viracocha of the Andes, Quetzalcoatl of Mesoamerica, each described as emerging from the water, bringing laws and learning, then departing once more. Perhaps these myths are not about gods at all, but about survivors, mariners from the drowned coastlines, carrying fragments of the lost world's wisdom to those who remained. The sea is not empty. Beneath its shifting skin, it holds the architecture of memory. Stone steps descending into blackness, columns encrusted with coral, statues worn smooth by centuries of current. When sonar waves pass over them, they reveal ghostly images. Cities suspended between being and forgetting. Technology becomes archaeology's new myth, retelling stories that water refused to erase. And yet, with every new discovery, skepticism grows louder, as if the modern world is uncomfortable with the idea that the past may be deeper than it allows. To admit that civilizations rose and fell before our written record is to admit that progress is not a straight line, but a circle, that we too might be only one more layer awaiting burial. The ocean, after all, has infinite patience. The divers who first descended at Yonauni described a strange feeling, as if entering a temple built for no human eyes. Light filtered through the water in soft golden ribbons, tracing the edges of stairs that led nowhere. Fish moved like drifting thoughts between walls that might once have known human hands. In that underwater silence, time seemed irrelevant. The sea had turned architecture into meditation. Perhaps that is the final message of these submerged ruins. Not merely that something came before, but that nothing is ever truly lost. The flood did not destroy history. It transformed it into dream. It buried the first civilization, not as punishment, but as preservation, waiting for a species that could remember again. And now that we're beginning to see through the waves to trace the outlines of those forgotten cities, we face a question older than our maps. When the sea finally speaks, will we recognize the language of the stones it returns? In every age, humanity has left words behind on parchment, on clay, on silicon. Yet, there is another form of writing that predates them all. One that does not fade, one that outlives fire, empire, and even language itself. It is the writing of stone, carved, fitted, and aligned. The megaliths of the ancient world speak in geometry, in weight, in silence. Across continents and oceans, from the high plateau of Baalbek to the windswept ridges of Peru, stones were shaped with a precision that mocks time itself. They do not belong neatly to the civilizations credited with them. They seem older, as if inherited from a people who no longer had words, but still remembered meaning. Baalbek, in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, stands as one of the greatest riddles in archaeology. The Roman temples built there to Jupiter, Bacchus, and Venus are extraordinary. Yes, but beneath them lies something even older. The platform on which the Romans built is composed of stones so massive that even today's cranes would struggle to lift them. One block, known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, weighs over 1,000 tons. Another, buried partially in the quarry nearby, exceeds 1,200. The cuts are perfect, the joins seamless, the surfaces straight as if machined. No tool marks, no inscriptions, only stillness. Roman engineering, brilliant as it was, did not move stones like these. They used smaller blocks, easier to shape and transport. The megalithic foundation predates them, and no one knows by how much. Who built that base, and more importantly, why? Ancient legends claim Baalbek was a landing place for the gods. The same Anunnaki, whose names appear in Sumerian myth, said to have descended from the heavens to instruct humanity. Perhaps heavens did not mean sky, but something even more unreachable. A civilization so advanced that its remnants would appear divine to the people who found them. Thousands of miles away in the Andes, the walls of Sakai-Waman curve against the sky like the vertebrae of a sleeping titan. Each block, some weighing hundreds of tons, fits so tightly with its neighbors that not even a blade of grass can slip between them. The stones interlock in irregular shapes, yet together they form a perfect puzzle, one capable of surviving earthquakes for centuries. The Inca revered it, but even they said it was not theirs. They called the builders the people before, those who had vanished long before their own empire rose. In both places, Baalbek and Sakayan, we find the same paradox. Monumental precision in a time when no known technology could have achieved it. The language of stone transcends distance, suggesting that those who spoke at it once shared a grammar, a way of thinking rooted in resonance, proportion, and sound. For stone is not mute, it vibrates. When struck or aligned correctly, it hums with frequency, with tone. Archaeologists call it archoacoustics, the study of sound in ancient spaces. The stones of New Grange in Ireland, for instance, echo in deep resonance when certain frequencies are sung within its chamber, as if the architecture itself was an instrument. The Hippo of Malta, the subterranean temple, older than Egypt, amplifies the human voice to a haunting degree, resonating exactly at 110 hertz, a frequency that induces calm and altered awareness in the brain. Could it be that ancient builders were not merely engineers, but musicians of matter, tuning stone to echo the earth's hidden rhythms? If so, then their monuments were not tombs or temples in the ordinary sense. They were instruments of memory, designed to awaken something within those who stood inside. Even at Baalbek, the enormous stones seem arranged not just for strength, but for harmony. Their lengths and proportions form ratios that mirror the mathematics of sound waves. The same is true for the Great Pyramid of Giza, where the king's chamber resonates at a specific frequency linked to the Earth's own vibrations. These structures may have once sung not metaphorically, but literally. When voices, drums, or chants filled their spaces, the stones would have responded, amplifying and carrying the sound like an ancient choir. What were they trying to say? Perhaps nothing in words. Perhaps the message was the vibration itself, a language of tone that bypassed the intellect and spoke directly to the body, to the memory. Modern experiments have shown that resonance can alter perception, even emotion. Maybe ancient builders used it to align the human mind with the cosmos, to remember its place within the great rhythm. The Sumerians called it Mi, the divine measure that ordered the universe. The Egyptians called it Mat, balance. In every culture, the principle is the same. To build was to harmonize heaven and earth. When we speak of the first civilization, we often think of writing, and administration of cities and laws. But perhaps the true first civilization was one that spoke not through ink, but through frequency, not through speech, but through vibration. A civilization that understood that form itself could transmit meaning, that geometry was a sentence and proportion, a kind of syntax. Their monuments scattered across continents might be the fragments of an untranslatable book written in granite and basalt. There is something profoundly humbling about that thought, that the stones we walk among might be speaking, and we have forgotten how to listen. Every block at Baalbek, every curve at Sakaiwaman, every carved pillar at Göbekli Tepe, they all seem to echo the same truth. That knowledge was once carved into the earth itself, meant to endure even after memory failed. When the flood came, when centuries erased language and lineage, these stones remained. They did not need translation. They waited. And when new civilizations rose, Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, they might have mistaken those remnants for divine gifts. The Sumerians said their gods taught them architecture, but perhaps what they truly found were ruins, lessons in stone left behind by those who had already mastered the art of resonance. The forgotten language of stones is not about words. It is about relationship between sound and form, sky and ground, memory and material. We who have surrounded ourselves with noise can no longer hear it. Yet if you stand at dawn within the ruins of Sakayan or the silent quarry of Baalbek, you might feel it, a faint hum beneath your feet, as if the earth itself were breathing in rhythm with something ancient. And maybe that is the final secret. That civilization does not end when people vanish or when scripts are lost. It ends only when resonance stops, when the vibration between meaning and matter falls silent. The stones, patient, as eternity, are still waiting to be read again. Long before priests and scribes wrote the names of gods, there were stories, whispers of beings who came from the heavens, not as myths, but as memories. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki, those who came down from above. The Babylonians remembered them as Abkalu, the 7 sages who rose from the sea after the flood to teach humankind how to rebuild. Across the world, the same pattern repeats: gods descending, instructing, departing. In Egypt, they were the Netu, divine architects who ruled during the age of Zepi. The first time in Mesoamerica, Catalcott arrived from the east, pale-skinned and bearded, bringing knowledge of the calendar and astronomy. In the Andes, Viracocha emerged from Lake Titicaca, carrying the flame of civilization. The names change, but the story remains. Humanity was taught, not invented. Modern historians call these stories symbolic allegories of natural forces or archetypes of cultural awakening. Yet it is difficult to ignore how consistent they are, separated by oceans and epics. The flood always comes first, then the teachers. The gifts are always the same: writing, measurement, agriculture, law, and the reading of the heavens. As if after a world-ending silence, civilization was restarted from a single surviving source. In Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki were said to have descended upon the plain of Eridu. There they taught humans how to build canals, how to write on clay, how to measure the stars. Their leader, Enki, the Lord of Earth, was the patron of knowledge, water, and creation. He and his council established order where chaos had been. Yet even in those earliest texts, there is an undertone of loss. The Sumerians did not claim ownership of knowledge. They claimed inheritance. Their myths speak of a time when the gods still walked among men and then withdrew. Some scholars searching through these myths have suggested they encode the story of an advanced but forgotten culture. Not divine in the supernatural sense, but divine by comparison. Survivors of a previous world who possessed technologies and sciences that appeared miraculous to the primitive societies that emerged after the flood. The sky gods may have been skyfarers of another kind, astronomers, navigators, the last custodians of a lost order. Even the term Anunnaki carries ambiguity. In older Sumerian usage, it referred not to distant celestial beings, but to the royal offspring of Anu, the great sky deity. Inscriptions describe them as tall, luminous, their garments glittering like scales, fish-like robes, eagle-headed figures, symbols of both water and air. These hybrid forms may not have been literal, but represent transitional beings, messengers between heaven and earth. If the flood reset the human timeline, then perhaps those figures symbolize the reintroduction of lost knowledge, part human, part divine, standing between memory and myth. The story of Anus, recorded by Berossus in the 3rd century BCE, is particularly telling. He describes a being who emerged from the Persian Gulf, half man, half fish, who spoke to humans during the day and returned to the sea at night. Awans taught them language, arts, and sciences, the founding principles of civilization. Later versions of this legend call him one of the Abkalu, the 7 sages of Eridu. Their number 7 recurs endlessly. 7 heavens, 7 gates, 7 days. The same pattern appears in the Egyptian Ogdo, the 8 primordial deities who brought forth order, and the Andean legends of the 7 shining brothers. Is it coincidence or the fading echo of a memory, repeated until its meaning blurred? When the Sumerians recorded the king list, they spoke of rulers who reigned before the flood for tens of thousands of years. After the flood, lifespan shrank, power diminished, and the divine withdrew. This pattern of immense longevity before catastrophe appears again in the biblical patriarchs, in Hindu yugas, in Mayan Bhaktunas. It is as though time itself once moved differently, or humanity measured it by another rhythm entirely. To later civilizations, the beings who lived through those earlier ages would indeed seem immortal, their knowledge too vast to explain. Modern archaeology dismisses these ancient teachers as mythic personifications. But what if myth at its root is not invention, but translation? A way to preserve truth when language no longer suffices. The ancients may have encoded real encounters into symbolic form, embedding knowledge in story so it could survive ignorance. The Anunnaki might not have descended from stars in the literal sense, but from a civilization that had already touched them, metaphorically or otherwise, in its understanding of the cosmos. Even the architecture of early cities seems to echo this descent. The ziggurat, that great stairway between heaven and earth, is a monument to the idea of connection. Each level rises close to the sky, as if emulating the god's path downward. The most famous of these, the ziggurat of Yu, was dedicated to Nana, the moon god, the watcher of time. Its proportions mirror lunar cycles with uncanny accuracy. Did the Sumerians design it as imitation or remembrance? The deeper question may not be who the Anunnaki were, but why their memory endures. Every ancient culture contains some version of the civilizing visitor, the luminous stranger who departs with the promise to return. Such myths persist because they speak to something primal, our sense that knowledge itself is not native to us, that we're rediscovering rather than inventing. The Sumerians believed the arts of civilization came from the heavens, not because they lacked imagination, but because their oldest memories pointed skyward. The idea that humanity received knowledge from an earlier, possibly extraterrestrial source has, of course, become a modern mythology of its own. But whether the Sky Kings were flesh, metaphor, or myth, they represent a truth deeper than either skepticism or faith. They remind us that civilization is not linear, but cyclical, that each age inherits the ashes of the one before it. The gods may have been ancestors so far removed by catastrophe that they seemed divine. When we look up today, tracing constellations first named by the Sumerians, Orion, Taurus, Leo, we are still speaking their celestial language. We are still mapping the heavens according to the lines they drew. The Anunnaki may not stand above us, but their knowledge endures in the invisible geometry between earth and sky. Every temple aligned to solstice, every calendar tuned to the stars, every myth of descent and return. All are echoes of the first dialogue between humanity and the cosmos. And perhaps that is why the ancients never truly claimed to own knowledge. They remembered it as a gift, one that came from beyond the flood, beyond the stars, from beings who saw further than we could. Whether those beings were gods, survivors, or reflections of ourselves, their presence lingers. The question then is not whether the Sky Kings were real. The question is whether we, their inheritors, have forgotten how to listen to the silence they left behind. Civilizations leave ruins, but evolution leaves whispers. Deep within the double helix of our DNA lies a story older than any written word, one that speaks not of bricks and ziggurats, but of consciousness itself. For thousands of years, humanity existed in scattered tribes, speaking in gestures and firelight, shaping stone tools and bones. Then, in what anthropologists call the Great Leap Forward, everything changed. Suddenly there was art, language, mathematics, astronomy. Within a geological blink, Homo sapiens went from surviving to inventing. The question that still haunts evolutionary science is not how we survived, but how we knew. The Sumerians emerged already fluent in the language of civilization. They did not stumble into complexity. They awoke into it. Their earliest tablets describe advanced law codes, precise astronomical cycles, complex medical procedures, and a written script so sophisticated that linguists suspected evolved from an older, unrecorded tongue. There are no transitional forms, no crude precursors, no half-formed experiments in writing or mathematics. It simply appears as though someone handed them the blueprint for civilization and left. In genetics, there is a similar puzzle. Around 200,000 years ago, the human genome experienced a series of rapid mutations that distinguished us sharply from our nearest relatives. The exact causes remain unknown. Our brains expanded disproportionately. Our larynx descended to allow speech, and our capacity for symbolic thought exploded. Yet the fossil record shows no gradual preparation for these leaps. One generation, we were primates with tools, the next artists with temples. Evolution does not usually leap, it crawls. And yet here, it sprinted. Some researchers uncomfortably aware of this anomaly have called it the Sumerian problem, the same sudden emergence of intelligence mirrored at both the biological and cultural level. What force could synchronize the evolution of mind and civilization? Was it purely environmental, a convergence of climate stability, surplus, and social complexity? Or did something more enigmatic occur, something that shaped our species from within? In the myths of the ancient Near East, there is a recurring image: the gods creating humanity not from clay alone, but by mixing divine essence with earthly matter. In the epic of Atrahasis, Enki and the goddess Nintu fashioned humans from clay, infused with the blood of a god. The intent was not symbolic, it was instructional. To the Sumerians, life itself was engineered, crafted with purpose. The breath of the gods that animated clay may have been their way of remembering something far more literal, an intervention in our biology by an intelligence older than we dare imagine. Geneticists today can trace the ancestry of every human to a single female line, mitochondrial Eve, who lived roughly 150,000 to 200,000 years ago. The timing aligns eerily with the burst of cognitive evolution that separated us from other hominins. Around the same period, Neanderthals vanished, Denisovans faded, and Homo sapiens became dominant. Yet we now know they interbred. Our genome carries traces of them: 1 to 4% Neanderthal, up to 6% Denisovan in some populations. But there are also sequences that do not match any known hominin. Genes that appear inserted, not inherited. Genes that seem borrowed. Some of these sequences are linked to neurological development, immune response, and even the shaping of the skull. A few scientists quietly have suggested horizontal gene transfer, a process known in bacteria, but nearly unheard of in mammals. Others dismiss this as data noise. Yet the mystery remains. The pattern is too precise to be dismissed, too subtle to be proven. We may be quite literally a mosaic, a living archive of genetic experiments stretching across ebooks. To ancient cultures, the idea of divine creation was never metaphorical. It was memory distorted by language and time. The Anuneri, according to later interpretations of Sumerian myths, did not simply teach humans, they made them. They shaped early hominids to serve, then to think, then to remember. Most historians reject this reading, and rightly so. The texts are fragmentary, the translations debated. Yet, the symbolic core of the myth persists. Humanity as an intentional hybrid, a creature balanced between earth and heaven. The same motif appears in Genesis, where Adam is formed from dust, yet infused with divine breath. In Egypt, Tha and Khnum sculpt humans on a potter's wheel. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl mixes corn with blood. Creation in all these traditions is always an act of combination, matter infused with mind. If these stories preserve even a shadow of memory, then perhaps the leap in human evolution was not random. Perhaps it was a restoration, a reactivation of something dormant, encoded in the deep archive of our genome, a genetic memory of an earlier intelligence buried by catastrophe, reawakened when the conditions were right. Anthropologists sometimes speak of cultural amnesia, the way entire societies forget their own origins. But perhaps there is a deeper amnesia, written into us biologically. If knowledge once flowed freely through ancient lineages, that flow was broken by the flood, by time, by fear. What remains are glimpses, sudden bursts of genius in unexpected places. The Sumerians with their mathematics and medicine, the Egyptians with their cosmic architecture, the Maya with their astronomical calendars. Civilizations separated by millennia, yet united by an inexplicable understanding of order, geometry, harmony, and proportion. Genetics tells us that memory is not only in the mind, but in the body. Trauma passes down generations, encoded chemically in the nervous system. So, why not memory too? Could it be that our fascination with the stars, our instinct for music, our longing for symmetry, are all inherited traces of an older consciousness embedded in the genome like forgotten code? The myths of the gods who made man in their image may not describe literal beings descending from the sky, but rather the image of an intelligence already within us, reawakening after ages of dormancy. And yet, there is a paradox. The more we learn about our DNA, the less we seem to understand our own origins. Every new discovery, ancient interbreeding, unexplained genes, sudden mutations, widens the gap between what we know and what we are. The Sumerians, with their serene confidence in divine ancestry, may have understood something we cannot articulate. That humanity did not simply appear, but was remembered into being. The clay tablets of Mesopotamia describe the moment of creation as one of remembrance, not invention. The gods remembered humanity into form as if they were restoring what had been before. Our science, in its own way, is doing the same, piecing together fragments of forgotten design. Perhaps the real question is not whether someone made us, but whether we were made to remember. The genome, after all, is a language. 4 letters repeating across billions of sequences. And like any ancient text, it hides layers of meaning beneath the surface. Maybe one day, when we learn to read it fully, we will discover that the story of civilization did not begin in clay or stone, but in the quiet spirals of the code itself. A message written long before Sumer rose from the floodplain. And if that message exists, what does it say? History, as we are taught, unfolds neatly, one age giving rise to another, each century building upon the last. But beneath that tidy sequence lies a labyrinth of contradictions, dates that do not fit, dynasties that last too long, ruins older than their supposed creators. Archaeology calls them anomalies. Myth calls them memories. Somewhere between those two lies the possibility that our timeline, the very calendar by which we measure human existence, is not just incomplete, but deliberately edited. The Sumerian king list, one of the oldest surviving records of kingship, begins with a phrase that defies logic. After the kingship descended from heaven, it was in Ooredoo. What follows is even stranger. It lists 8 kings who ruled for a combined total of 241 and 200 years. The numbers are absurd unless they're not meant to be understood in human terms. After the flood, the list continues. Lifespans shrink dramatically. Kings now reign for hundreds, not thousands of years. Civilization restarts. Scholars interpret these vast reigns as mythic exaggeration, but the same pattern appears across cultures. In the Hebrew Bible, the patriarchs lived nearly a millennium. In Egypt, the reigns of divine dynasties stretch into the tens of thousands. In India, the yugas span millions. What if these numbers are not mistakes, but echoes of an earlier rhythm of time, one measured differently, perhaps astronomically? The ancients did not perceive time as linear. They measured it through cycles of stars, of precession, of cosmic ages. A Sumerian year might not mean what we think. It could represent a greater unit, perhaps a synodic period, perhaps even a precessional count of equinoxes. If so, then the kings before the flood may have reigned not for millennia, but through entire epochs, as symbols of cosmic order rather than human rule. And yet, even metaphor can preserve memory. What remains troubling is how consistent these long chronologies are across civilizations that supposedly never met. The Egyptian historian Manetho wrote of the reign of the gods, a period of 13,900 years before the first mortal pharaoh. In Mesopotamia, Berossus recorded that the gods ruled for 432,000 years before the deluge, the same number encoded in the Hindu cycle of Kali Yuga, 432,000 years. The Norse myths of Asgard speak of divine ages ending in flood and fire. The Mayan calendar counts 13 back tunes, 525 years each, before the renewal of the current world. Why the repetition of sacred numbers across cultures, coincidence, or preservation of an older cosmic mathematics now forgotten? Some researchers, notably in the early 20th century, proposed that humanity had passed through several lost epochs of civilization, each destroyed by cataclysm and followed by amnesia. They argue that king lists, mythic chronologies, and sacred numbers are fragments of that memory, calendars of disaster disguised as theology. When the priests of Uruk recorded the king list, perhaps they were not inventing legends, but reconstructing time itself, piecing together fragments of oral histories that survived the flood. If so, our known history, the 5,000 years of writing we recognize, may be only the surface of something far deeper. The notion of forbidden chronology arises precisely here, in the uneasy space between evidence and orthodoxy. Archaeologists who date a site too early often face skepticism or silence. Göbekli was dismissed for decades because it contradicted the agricultural timeline. The ruins of Tiwanaku in Bolivia, once estimated at 15,000 years old by early surveyors, were redated to fit a more comfortable narrative. When anomalies threaten the linear model of progress, they are quietly reclassified. Yet the stones remain older than explanation. The Maya, Egyptians, Sumerians, and Hindus all spoke of cyclical ages, vast turning wheels of time. In the Hindu system, each yuga diminishes in virtue, ending in catastrophe before renewal. The Sumerians is likewise described a pre-flood golden age, when gods and men shared the earth followed by decline and purification. If we interpret these not as myths, but as records of recurring resets, floods, fires, cosmic impacts, then the forbidden chronology becomes not heresy, but remembrance. Civilization in this view is not a climb, but a heartbeat. Rise, fall, rebirth. Even within recorded history, there are fractures. The reign of the first Egyptian dynasties overlaps suspiciously with Sumerian kingship. Chinese civilization, too, claims mythical emperors reigning before 3000 BCE, inventing agriculture and calendars. How did such knowledge arise simultaneously across continents? Diffusionists once argued for a single source, an ancient mother civilization that seeded others after the flood. The idea fell from academic favor, branded as pseudoscience. But what if it was closer to the truth than we dared admit? The Vatican's early chronologists, compiling the first universal histories, encountered similar problems. Ancient sources contradicted each other. Timelines overlapped impossibly. Many records were quietly excluded from canon. The long reigns of Mesopotamian kings, the divine dynasties of Egypt, the Persian Zoroastrian cycles. To preserve the integrity of the biblical timeline, they had to compress antiquity. By fixing creation at roughly 4000 BCE, they made Summa the beginning, not a continuation. Every earlier thread was labeled myth, And thus history as we know it was born not as discovery, but as editing. In libraries and monasteries across the Middle East and Europe, fragments of alternative chronologies still survive. Tablets describing astronomical cycles that span hundreds of millennia. Genealogies that cross floods and fires. They are rarely studied because they do not fit the narrative. Yet they persist like fossils of forgotten truth. Perhaps the strangest clue comes not from myth, but from mathematics. The number 432,000 Twars, the sum of divine reigns in the Sumerian king list, and the length of the Hindu Kali Yuga also appears in the dimensions of sacred architecture. The Great Pyramid's perimeter, multiplied by 43,200, equals the Earth's equatorial circumference. Ancient builders seem to encode celestial scales into stone, as though reminding us that history itself is not written in years, but in ratios, cosmic harmonies of orbit and revolution. If this is true, then time itself is a language we have forgotten how to read. The ancients may have understood it as music, each age and note in the symphony of recurrence. When that music fell silent, the new world mistook the pause for a beginning. Sumer became the first, but perhaps it was simply the first remembered after silence. The forbidden chronologies, dismissed as superstition, may in fact be fragments of a deeper science, one that measured time not by kings, but by cycles of celestial rhythm. They tell us not of fantasy, but of memory, the memory of worlds that rose before ours, of knowledge preserved through number and myth. If every civilization inherits only a partial song of time, then we are still deaf to the melody that once connected them, and maybe that is why history feels incomplete, because we are listening to the echo, not the origin. So what if the Sumerian king list, the yugas, and the sacred calendars were not exaggerations, but records of an age we no longer believe in? What if our history began not in 4000 BCE, but in the shadow of a far older dawn, one erased but not forgotten? Waiting for us to remember that time, too, has a memory. Every civilization is built not only upon stone and soil, but upon the quiet architecture of memory, the way it chooses what to remember and what to forget. Between ruins and libraries, between myth and record, there is always an invisible hand shaping the story. The past, like clay, is soft in the beginning, and whoever first writes upon it decides how all who follow will see. Perhaps that is the greatest power ever held by any empire. Not the power to conquer, but to define what existed before conquest. When the first scribes of Sumer pressed their styluses into wet clay, they were not merely recording. They were editing the silence that had come before. Every tablet, every sign, every temple inscription was a thread in a narrative that would one day become history. But for all the brilliance of those scribes, one must wonder what voices they silenced in the process. If Sumer was indeed a rebirth after a forgotten flood of knowledge, then its chroniclers were not inventing civilization, but curating it. They preserved fragments and cast away others, constructing a world that began when they said it began. It has always been this way. When Egypt rose, it too wrote its own beginning, declaring its gods the first, its Nile the center of creation. When Greece inherited Egypt's science, it renamed the stars, the measures, the philosophies. Rome inherited Greece and wrote over its myths. And later, the Church inherited Rome, turning myth into scripture, empire into doctrine. Each age built its memory upon the ruins of the last, not by accident, but by design. The architects of memory did not only build monuments, they built meaning. Consider how much of antiquity we know only through translation. The fragments that survived conquest and censorship. The Library of Alexandria burned, its papyrus scrolls reduced to ash. The cuneiform archives of Nineveh were buried in rubble until the 19th century. The libraries of Nanda in India, of Baghdad in the Abbasid era, of Constantinople, each in its own way, erased. These were not random losses. Each fire cleansed the record, narrowing the lineage of knowledge. Each destruction simplified the story. The church fathers of late antiquity, inheriting both Greek rationalism and Hebrew theology, faced an uncomfortable inheritance. Texts that spoke of worlds and gods before Eden, kings before Adam, floods before the flood. To preserve doctrinal coherence, they folded time into a single chronology. The Earth, according to medieval scholars like Bean Usher, was created in 404 BCE, the same moment Sumer was already flourishing. Thus, history was remade to fit Scripture. The ancient empires that spoke of tens of thousands of years were declared mythic, their gods reduced to allegory. Knowledge was preserved, but only in translation, rewritten to fit a single origin story. This was not malice, but method. To control history is to control direction, to tell humanity not only where it came from, but what it is moving toward. The scribes of Sumer gave us writing. The priests of later ages gave us meaning. Yet in doing so, they may have confined us within the boundaries of their own remembering. In every culture, we find hints of a hidden continuity. Archives said to hold secrets of worlds before ours. The Sumerians spoke of the tablets of destiny, records kept by the gods, upon which the fate of heaven and earth was written. The Egyptians called theirs the books of Thoth, said to grant understanding of all things past and future. The Greeks whispered of Atlantis, where the sacred archives of the old world were sealed beneath the sea. And in later centuries, the Vatican archives, vast guarded subterranean, would become the modern symbol of hidden knowledge. It is as though every age instinctively creates a vault for what cannot be spoken aloud. But what if the real archive is not a place, but a system, the way knowledge survives in disguise? Myth as memory, religion as encryption, architecture as code. The builders of antiquity did not rely on fragile parchment or word of mouth. They built in stone, in proportion, in alignment with stars. A temple that mirrors the heavens is not simply a house of worship. It is a map of knowledge, written in a language that only geometry can read. When one civilization falls, the stone remains, waiting for another to decode it. Perhaps the architects of memory knew that history itself would fail, that floods and fire would erase words but not ratios. In this sense, the Great Pyramid, the Ziggurat, the Temple of Kar, and the observatories of Central America all belong to the same conversation. They are stone libraries, repositories of a science that speaks through harmony rather than text. The knowledge they encode is not forbidden. It is simply untranslated. And yet power has always sought to own that translation. Empires have rewritten calendars, changed the names of constellations, erased rival dynasties. Even now, archaeology functions within boundaries of what is acceptable to know. When a discovery fits the established model, it is celebrated. When it does not, it is quietly set aside, waiting for another generation to ask the same questions anew. The architects of memory are not gone. They have simply changed their tools. The stylus has become the algorithm, the clay tablet, the digital archive. Still, the principle endures. Knowledge must be curated to sustain the illusion of order. There are rare moments, however, when the architecture cracks, when a forgotten manuscript surfaces, when radar reveals a buried city, when an ancient text speaks of stars we can now confirm only with telescopes. In those moments, the linear timeline trembles, and we glimpse a truth older than our certainties. It is then that we understand that the gods of Sumer, the teachers, the builders, the descendants of the sky, may not have vanished at all. Their knowledge simply changed form, hiding in the geometry of language, the rhythm of myth, the symmetry of memory. Every civilization builds monuments to itself. But perhaps those monuments are also warnings. To remember too little is to lose the thread. To remember too much is to risk heresy. Somewhere between those extremes, history survives, distorted but alive. The architects of memory were not only builders of cities, but custodians of forgetting. They understood that every revelation demands a veil. So perhaps the true question is not what knowledge was lost, but what knowledge was buried intentionally, waiting for those who could read beyond chronology. The archives of the world, both visible and hidden, are filled with the ghosts of erased beginnings. And maybe that is by design. For if humanity ever recalled its full past, if it remembered that Sumer was not the first, but the latest bloom in an ancient garden, the entire structure of history would collapse into light. And maybe, just maybe, that is what the architects of memory have been guarding all along. Every civilization has its own alphabet, but symbols, those simple recurring shapes carved into rock or whispered through ritual, speak across ages. They are the universal residue of meaning surviving long after words decay. Spirals, serpents, suns, and stars. Those are not decorations. They are sentences written in the oldest language humanity ever spoke, the language of pattern. To look upon them is to hear an echo, faint but persistent, from the first architects of memory. If Sumer was the rebirth of writing, then symbols with the pulse that came before it. Across caves, stones, and temples, older than recorded history, the same motifs emerge as if by memory, rather than invention. The spiral carved into megaliths at New Grange Island is identical to those etched into stones in Malta and Peru. The coiled serpent that guards the temples of Mesoamerica slithers through the myths of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and India. Even the shape of the ziggurat, tired, ascending, repeats in the pyramids of Giza and Teotihuacan, and in the stepped stupors of Asia. These are not coincidences. They are echoes, and echoes always suggest an original sound. To understand these symbols is to realize that they are not merely art, but function. Ancient memory devices, mnemonic maps, encoded in geometry and rhythm. The spiral, for example, appears where time itself is invoked. It is the pattern of galaxies, of shells, of hurricanes, of the human cochlea. The ear's own spiral chamber that turns vibration into meaning. Perhaps the ancients carved it not to worship, but to remember, to remind themselves that creation moves in cycles, not lines. The serpent, too, was never merely an emblem of evil or wisdom. It was motion personified, the coiling of energy, the cycle of death and rebirth, the current that binds sky and earth. The ancients may have seen in it not an animal, but a principle. Across Mesopotamia, temple priests called the Bu were trained in both divination and sound. They believed that vibration connected the mortal and the divine. The ziggurats, rising like staircases to the heavens, were not just towers of observation, but of resonance. Their bricks baked and shaped in mathematical proportion may have been tuned, each chamber designed to amplify a specific tone. In the Sumerian language, the word for temple, El, also means great house, but its roots linked to the concept of vibration, of that which calls forth. When hymns were sung to the gods, the stones themselves would hum in sympathy. This ancient awareness of sound power appears everywhere. In Egypt, the Pura, the pharaoh was called the great house of the car, the vessel of spiritual resonance. In the Hindu Im, the universe itself is a sound, a vibration through which reality unfolds. The Greeks called it the music of the spheres, the harmony of celestial motion. To the Maya, the plumed serpent Kukulkan spoke through wind. His temple at Chichen Itza still echoes the sound of his call. Clap your hands beneath its steps, and the returning echo becomes the cry of a bird that no longer flies. Coincidence or design? When sound moves through space, it leaves no trace. And yet, its geometry can shape matter. In modern science, this is known as cymatics, the study of how vibration organizes particles into intricate patterns. Ancient builders may have understood this intuitively. The layout of their temples, the curvature of their walls, the ratios of their chambers all align with harmonic intervals. The Great Pyramid, for instance, resonates at frequencies matching the Earth's own electromagnetic pulse. When sound is made within its core chambers, it lingers unnaturally long, as if the stone itself were listening. Perhaps that is why ancient people treated words as sacred acts. To speak a name was to call it into being. To sing was to shape reality. The earliest writing systems, Sumerian ununiform, Egyptian hieroglyphs, Chinese oracle script, all began as pictographs infused with sound. They were not mere records but sonic diagrams, visual representations of vibration. The connection between symbol and sound was absolute. Each glyph carried frequency. Each frequency, intent even after millennia, that principle survives. Chant, prayer, mantra. They are echoes of the first rituals, when the human voice sought to realign with the cosmic pulse. The priests sang in tones that corresponded to planetary cycles. The builders of Stonehenge tuned their monoliths to natural resonances of wind and drum. The shamans of Siberia, the monks of Tibet, the healers of Africa, all still follow that same invisible science. To heal the soul, tune the sound, to commune with the unseen, become its vibration. It is tempting to dismiss this as poetic mysticism, but modern physics in its own language is returning to the same conclusion. The universe is not matter, but energy, not static, but oscillating. Every atom, every star, every thought is a vibration. What the ancients intuited through myth and music, we now rediscover through equations. In that sense, the continuity between their temples and our laboratories is not as distant as it seems. Symbols, too, vibrate. They are shapes that resonate within the human psyche. Carl Jung called them archetypes, collective memories, inherited from the deep mind. But perhaps they are more than psychological. Perhaps they are electromagnetic patterns, impressions left in the field of consciousness itself. Why else do humans across the world without contact draw the same spirals, crosses, eyes, and stars? These are not inventions, but recollections, the fingerprints of an older system of thought that transcended speech. Imagine an age when sound, symbol, and matter were one, when architecture was language, when chant was science, when the temple's echo was the universe listening to itself. Such an age may have preceded Sumer, leaving behind only fragments, carved spirals, resonant chambers, myths of gods who sang creation into being. The Sumerians, inheriting that legacy, may have encoded its last vestiges into their own rituals, preserving in syllables what once was known in resonance. And perhaps this is the thread that binds all civilizations, a memory of the time when the world itself was understood as music, when knowledge was harmony, and the builders of stone spoke in tones that shaped both sky and soul. If that memory still lingers in our bones, if we still dream in spiral, still hum unconsciously to calm the mind, then maybe we too are instruments tuned to a forgotten frequency. The echo has not ended. It merely waits for us to remember how to listen again. If the ancients inherited their wisdom from some forgotten age, then their greatest expression of gratitude was not written in words, but in the sky itself. For everywhere they built, on plains, deserts, islands, and mountaintops, they aligned their monuments with the stars. They measured heaven in stone, mapping eternity across the earth. Long before the first telescope, before Kepler or Copernicus, there were watchers who understood that the heavens move not randomly, but musically. They were the celestial engineers, builders who fused architecture and astronomy, matter and myth. The first maps of the stars were not drawn on parchment, but carved into the ground. The great ziggurats of Mesopotamia rose as staircases toward the firmament, each level dedicated to a celestial body: the moon, the sun, Venus, Jupiter, Mars, Mercury, Saturn. The priests watched their movements nightly, recording their paths with a precision that modern astronomers still admire. Yet what startles most is not their observation, but their memory. The Sumerians already knew of planetary cycles that take centuries to repeat. They tracked the precession of the equinoxes, a 26,000-year cycle, though no single human life could have measured it. Such awareness implies continuity, inheritance. The knowledge had been passed down, perhaps preserved since before the flood. The ziggurats were not unique. In Egypt, the pyramids of Giza are aligned so precisely with true north that modern instruments err more than their builders did. Their shafts point toward Orion's belt and Sirius, constellations sacred to Osiris and Isis, deities of death and resurrection. To many Egyptologists, this was symbolic myth, but the precision betrays a deeper understanding, one of stellar mechanics. Around 10,500 BCE, the constellation Orion sat exactly at the meridian line of the Giza Plateau. That date appears again and again in the orientation of temples at Karak and the layout of the Sphinx. Why that epoch? Why that sky? Perhaps because that was the time of rebirth, when the floods of the younger Dryas receded and the stars once more became visible through the haze of catastrophe. Perhaps the monuments of Egypt, like those of Sumer, were memory markers, recording not only the heavens, but the trauma of the world's reset. Far away, on another continent, the same sky-watching instinct emerged. The builders of Teotihuacan oriented their city to the rising of the Pleiades. At Machu Picchu, the Inatana stone casts no shadow at noon on the equinox, as if its designers had frozen sunlight itself. At Napa, in the Sahara, 7,000 years before the pyramids, stones were arranged to mark the summer solstice and the rising of Orion. Even Stonehenge, far to the north, was not random. Its lintels align with the sun's midsummer rise. From deserts to rainforests, the same precision, the same reverence for celestial geometry. What does it mean that ancient peoples across the world built with the same cosmic grammar. Did they rediscover it independently? Or were they following an inherited pattern, a blueprint, from a vanished source civilization that once understood the sky as a great clock of destiny? Modern science calls this archaeoastronomy, the study of how ancient structures align with celestial events. But even that term feels too narrow, for these alignments are not simply observational. They are participatory. The ancients did not look at the heavens from afar. They built in resonance with them. A temple aligned to a solstice is not just a calendar. It is a conversation between earth and sky, a synchronization of matter with movement. In Mesopotamia, the planet Venus was worshipped as Inanna, the goddess of love and war. Her morning and evening appearances, marking duality, descent, and return. The Sumerians charted her 584-day cycle, noticing its connection to the pentagonal path she traces in the heavens. Millennia later, Pythagoras would teach that same geometry as sacred. The knowledge survived, transformed, but intact, like a song hummed across generations. One could argue that this obsession with celestial order was practical, agriculture, navigation, ritual. But beneath the practical lies the metaphysical, the belief that to live rightly is to live in alignment. The stars were not gods themselves, but mirrors of an invisible law. The Sumerians called that law Mi, the divine ordinances by which the universe holds its form. To violate it was chaos. To follow it was civilization. In that sense, astronomy was not science, but devotion. The Egyptians, too, encoded cosmic ratios into their temples. The angle of the Great Pyramid's slope reflects the golden ratio, the same proportion found in planetary orbits and spiral galaxies. The Temple of Luxor mirrors the human body. The Dendera ceiling depicts a zodiac more sophisticated than any of its time. These were not primitive stargazers. They were scientists in priestly robes, inheritors of a code so old that its purpose may have faded even as its rituals endured. The same code appears in Sumerian mathematics. Their base, 60 system, sexesimal, is still with us today, in our 60 minutes 300 Uster. Why 60? Because it divides perfectly into the cycles of the sky, the rotation of the earth, the movement of the moon, the apparent motion of the sun. Time itself, as we measure it, is Sumerian, or perhaps pre-Sumerian, passed down from a civilization for whom mathematics was sacred harmony. Everywhere we look, the same pattern emerges. The heavens mirrored on earth. As above, so below. The builders of ancient cities did not see themselves as inventors, but as restorers, rebuilding the cosmic order after the flood had scattered it. Their temples were diagrams of the universe, their rituals reenactments of celestial mechanics. In their myths, gods descend from the stars to teach mankind. In their architecture, mankind reaches upward to meet them. It is easy to romanticize such vision, to imagine priests with telescopes of crystal or maps of precession etched on gold. But perhaps the truth is quieter. Perhaps these people inherited sky knowledge the way we inherit instinct, not consciously, but through the deep memory of the species. The same memory that urges us to look up at night and count, to find patterns, to name. The constellations are not simply there, they remembered. And if the Sumerians were the first to write, perhaps what they truly recorded was not the discovery of the stars, but their rediscovery, a recovery of what had been known and lost before the waters rose. Their sky gods, their ziggurats, their calendars, all memorials to an ancient science that measured not just distance, but destiny. To read those alignments now is to realize that history, like the sky, moves in orbits. Civilizations rise and fall as predictably as constellations. The stars above Sumer are the same stars that look down on whatever came before, and they will shine still when we too are ruins aligned to nothing but memory. If the stars above have always moved in rhythm, then time itself is not a straight path, but a turning wheel, a cosmic breath that expands, collapses, and begins again. The ancients seem to know this instinctively. Their myths do not describe a single creation, but a series of creations, each one ending in fire, flood, or silence. The Hindu yugas, the Greek ages of gold and iron, the Mayan suns all tell the same story. The world has ended many times, and each ending erases more than just life. It erases memory. It fractures the continuity of knowing, forcing civilization to begin anew, unaware that it has walked this circle before. Modern science, cautious and clinical, whispers a similar tale in its own language. The Earth's magnetic poles have reversed many times, each shift disrupting the climate, each upheaval leaving chaos in its wake. Geological record shows sudden extinctions and recoveries, spikes of cosmic radiation, and layers of ash marking violent restarts. The fossil strata are like pages torn and rewritten. If civilizations existed before the ones we know, their traces would be buried, melted, or ground into dust beneath the movements of continents. Our planet does not remember gently, and yet something of those lost epochs lingers, not in matter, but in mind. Why else would nearly every ancient culture speak of previous worlds destroyed? The Aztecs said, "We live in the fifth sun, the four before it having perished by flood, wind, fire, and beasts." The Egyptians described cycles of order and chaos, Mayat and Isis Fet, each renewal born from collapse. The Greeks told of ages that declined from gold to silver to bronze to iron, each marked by a loss of virtue and knowledge. Even the Sumerians, who we call the first, wrote of before the flood as though it were not legend, but a memory only slightly beyond reach. Perhaps what they all remembered was not simply myth, but trauma. The lingering echo of a global event that shattered human continuity. The end of the last ice age, with its abrupt climate swings and rising seas, could easily have seemed like the end of the world. But what if the pattern stretches further back, repeating across hundreds of millennia? Could our species be older, our amnesia deeper than we dare believe? Plato wrote that time itself is a moving image of eternity. The ancients took that literally. To them, the sky was a clock, not just marking hours, but epochs. When the stars shifted their positions, when the sun rose in a new zodiacal house, they believed the age had turned. We now know this as the precession of the equinoxes, a 26,000-year cycle. It is uncanny that cultures from Egypt to India to the Andes all recognized it. The ages of man may have been tied not to morality, but to celestial geometry, epics of alignment and dissonance between Earth and cosmos. Every end, in this view, is a recalibration. The flood was not punishment, but physics. The Earth's own mechanism for renewal. Magnetic reversals, comet impact, solar flares. These are the pulse beats of a living planet. Civilization is fragile because it grows during moments of calm, and calm never lasts. The fracture of ages is not anomaly, but law. Still, there are whispers that the last fracture was not purely natural. Myths of war among gods may conceal memory of ancient technologies gone awry. In Sumer, Enlil unleashes the flood to cleanse the earth of corrupted humanity. In Hindu texts, the Mahabharata describes weapons so bright they blind the sky, iron bolts charged with all the power of the universe. In Andean law, Viracocha destroys the giants of the previous world with fire from heaven. Are these allegories of divine wrath or fragmented accounts of forgotten science retold as myth after the survivors lost the language of machines? If such power once existed, then the disappearance of its memory may not have been accidental. Imagine a world where knowledge itself becomes dangerous, where the only way to survive is to forget. The flood then would be more than water. It would be a priest of later ages, would guard fragments of that lost wisdom, encrypting it in numbers, symbols, and rituals, never again daring to speak its full name. Perhaps that is why history seems to restart at convenient intervals, because it must. Each cycle begins with innocence, with simple tools and awe of nature. Then come agriculture, architecture, astronomy, law, the great rebuilding. Then the pattern accelerates. Ambition, mastery, imbalance, and then inevitably, collapse. The lesson is always the same, but we rarely remember it in time. Even in our own era, echoes of that forgotten rhythm persist. The 25 and 20-year precessional cycle is divided into 12 ages: Pisces, Aquarius, and so forth. Ancient astrologers believe that each age mirrors a phase of human consciousness. We're now said to be entering Aquarius, the water bearer, the age of revelation, of rediscovery. Could that mean that the flood of forgetting is finally receding? That we are beginning to remember what was lost? Or are we approaching another cleansing, one that will bury our own monuments beneath future seas? Archaeologists sometimes find inexplicable artifacts, worked metal in ancient strata, imprints of machinery like shapes fossilized in stone. Most are dismissed as coincidence, out-of-place objects. But if time is cyclical, perhaps they are not misplaced at all. Perhaps they belong to earlier revolutions of the same wheel, remnants of civilizations erased so completely that even their myths faded. We in turn will leave behind our own such relics to be found by those who rise after the next silence. There is a haunting symmetry in this idea that every civilization, no matter how advanced, is merely a chapter between floods. The builders of Göbekli may have been the inheritors of one such chapter, reconstructing memory from ruin. The Sumerians, in turn, carried that legacy forward, believing themselves the first, because all evidence of the earlier world lay drowned or buried. And we, modern digital confident, may be no different. In the language of geology, extinction is a natural rhythm. In the language of myth, it is divine judgment. But perhaps both describe the same phenomenon, the self-correcting nature of existence. When imbalance grows too great, when knowledge outruns wisdom, the cycle resets. The stars shift, the seas rise, the archive closes. If the ancients truly understood this, then their monuments aligned to solstices, and stars were not only calendars, but warnings. They whispered to the future, "This has happened before, it will happen again." But in our pursuit of progress, we learn to see time as a line, not a circle. We forgot the echo. And so the question remains, are we the culmination of civilization, or merely another prelude? Will our cities, like those of Sumer and Atlantis, vanish into sediment, our knowledge reduced to legend? The fracture of ages is patient. It does not destroy. It simply waits for the next forgetting. The story of the Earth is written not only in stone, but in temperature, in the pulse of heat and cold that governs all life. Fire and ice are its twin historians, sculpting both landscape and legend. Every few millennia, one rises to erase the other. The Sumerians remembered the flood. The Egyptians remembered the fire of Ra's wrath. The North spoke of Ragnarok, when flames devoured the frozen world. Beneath all these tales lies a truth both geological and mythic. That civilization itself may be only a brief interlude between extremes. Scientists call it the climate rhythm, the long oscillation between glaciations and interglacials. Every 100,000 years or so, the Earth exhales warmth, only to inhale cold again. The last breath of ice ended roughly 12,000 years ago, at the dawn of what we call history. But even within that warmth, the memory of catastrophe remains. The Younger Dry, that sudden return of ice and chaos, ended not gradually, but violently. Around 9700 BCE, temperatures spiked, glaciers melted in torrents, and oceans rose more than 100 meters. Something massive had struck the planet. A comet, a burst of solar radiation, perhaps both. It was this moment that divided prehistory from history, myth from memory. Across cultures, we find the same imagery. The world on fire, the sun dimmed, the sky raining molten glass. The Aboriginal Australians remember a fire from the sky that turned the sea to steam. The Egyptians recorded a time when the Nile ran red and boiled. In North America, the Clovis people vanished almost overnight. Their great mammoth hunts extinguished. Black layers of carbonized soil, the black mats stretch across the continents like scars. To the ancients, this was divine punishment. To us, it is geology. But perhaps those two languages describe the same event. After fire came water. The glaciers melted faster than the rivers could carry them away. Valleys drowned, islands sank, an entire ecosystem shifted. Those who survived the inferno faced the deluge. The ocean's hunger redrew every map. If civilizations had existed on the coasts, they would have vanished without trace. Only those on higher ground, the survivors who would one day become the Sumerians, the Egyptians, the builders of Göbekli Tepe, remained to remember. Yet their remembrance was incomplete. They spoke of gods, not impacts, of floods, not ice. The details blurred into poetry, but the trauma endured. Every temple aligned to the solstice, every myth of rebirth, every ritual fire. All these were acts of commemoration, ways to keep balance against a planet that could turn hostile again. To build was to resist oblivion. Modern climatology confirms what myth only hinted at. Earth's stability is temporary. Beneath our calm skies, cycles of destruction continue. Supervolcanoes sleep beneath the crust. Magnetic fields weaken and shift. Solar storms flicker with the power to blind satellites and erase data. Our fragile modern memory. Even now, Antarctica melts faster than predicted. Greenland's glaciers retreat, and methane seeps from the permafrost like a whisper from an older age. The next turning of the wheel may already have begun. Ancient texts seem to sense this inevitability. The Book of Enoch speaks of fire mingled with hail, a rain of molten ice from heaven. The Rig Veda describes a smoke-borne dawn when the sky glowed red for years. Plato's dialogues preserve the Egyptian priest's warning. There have been, and will be, many destructions of mankind, sometimes by fire, sometimes by water. The priest of seas told Solon that civilization itself was cyclical, destroyed each time the heavens shifted their course. Plato listened and gave us the tale of Atlantis. For centuries, Atlantis has been treated as allegory. Yet, As glaciers retreat and sonar maps reveal drowned coastlines, the allegory grows uncomfortably literal. Off the coasts of Spain, the Caribbean, even Antarctica, researchers have found structures too regular for nature, too old for history. Whether these were Atlantis or its countless analogues, the pattern repeats. Fire, flood, forgetting. The memory of ice lingers even in language. The Sumerian word for pure, ku, also means cold. The word for bright, bar, is linked to burning. Their cosmology held both elements as sacred, opposing yet necessary. Enlil's breath was the wind that froze. Enki's fire was the warmth that healed. To them, creation itself was a negotiation between heat and frost, the eternal tension of survival. Perhaps this is why so many ancient rituals revolve around temperature. The fire altars of Vedic India, the eternal flames of Zoroastrian temples, the winter solstice festivals of Europe, all mark moments when balance wavered. They are less celebrations and reminders. Humanity fragile between extremes builds culture as insulation against the cold and flame of cosmic recurrence. And what of our own age? We live surrounded by artificial fire, our cities glowing brighter than constellations. We control heat at will, believing ourselves safe from nature's cycles. Yet beneath the Arctic, ancient ice cores reveal a repeating pattern. Every civilization, every warm period, ends the same way. A spike, a collapse, a return to silence. The graphs are indifferent. They show not progress, but rhythm. In that sense, perhaps the Sumerians were right to frame time as divine decree. When kingship descended from heaven, their tablets say, order was restored. But heaven to them meant not paradise, it meant alignment. When Earth's rhythm matched the skies, life flourished. When it drifted, chaos returned. Their gods were the forces of stability and entropy, personified. So memory could endure them. To us, those gods are equations, climate models, solar cycles, magnetic flux. But the truth they represent has not changed. That civilization depends on balance, and balance never lasts. The memory of fire and ice lives in our myths because it lives in the planet itself. We are born of that tension and bound to repeat it. If the ancients encoded warnings in stone, perhaps it was not superstition, but foresight. They knew the world would burn and freeze again, and that knowledge alone could not prevent it. All they could do was pass the memory forward, wrapped in story, awaiting the next awakening. We too are now the storytellers of a warming world. Satellites watch the ice melt. Data replaces myth, but the essence is the same. Remembrance in the face of inevitable forgetting. Fire and ice are coming again, perhaps slowly, perhaps suddenly. And when they do, what will remain of us? Maybe somewhere on higher ground, another people will rebuild. They will find fragments of our cities, our machines, our satellites, and they will tell stories of gods who ruled the sky and drowned in their own flame. The wheel will turn once more, and memory, fractured but alive, will begin again. If fire and ice are the editors of the Earth's memory, then what remains hidden beneath their revisions must be the footnotes of eternity. Layers of civilization compressed into silence. Archaeologists dig, but each spade of soil reveals only fragments, as if the world itself has chosen to withhold its story. The further they go, the more sophisticated the ruins seem to become, not less. It is as though progress runs backward, underground. Beneath the cities of the known world, traces of older worlds wait, buried not just by sediment, but by intention. Every continent has its rumors of what sleeps below. In the Andes, tunnels carved through granite connect temples miles apart. Their walls vitrified as if melted by heat, too great for fire. Beneath the sands of Egypt, ground-penetrating radar has revealed caverns vast enough to hold monuments still unexcavated. Under the Giza Plateau lies the Osiris Shaft, descending through water-filled chambers to a sarcophagus resting in eternal darkness, but older than any pharaoh's reign. In Turkey, the underground city of Derinku stretches 11 levels deep, with ventilation shafts and stables, carved perfectly into volcanic rock. Its engineers understood pressure, airflow, and structure far beyond what their supposed era should allow. Who built such cities before the known ones began? And why hide from the sky? The idea of a civilization beneath civilization is not fantasy. It is the pattern of history itself. Each new culture rises upon the bones of the one before, inheriting its foundations without understanding them. Rome was built atop Etruscan tunnels. Jerusalem sits upon Canaanite stone. Mexico City upon Tanakh Titan. But what if that pattern goes deeper still? Below Sumer, below the flood, into a strata no archaeologist has reached. The mythic underworlds of ancient texts might not have been metaphors for the afterlife, but memories of these literal buried realms. In Mesopotamian belief, the underworld Kur was not hell, but a mirror of the surface world. There the ancient ones dwelled, feeding on dust, forgotten by the living. The Egyptians spoke of Duat, subterranean realm where souls traveled to meet Osiris, whose throne sat surrounded by stars beneath the earth. The Greeks called it Hades, the Mayans Xibalba, always the same motif. Knowledge hidden underground, guarded by silence. Perhaps these myths were maps, allegories pointing toward physical memory, places where remnants of earlier civilizations were preserved beneath catastrophe. In 1972, a team of geologists in Ecuador discovered a network of metallic libraries deep within the Cueva de los Tallos, polished slabs engraved with unknown symbols. The discovery was so extraordinary that even Neil Armstrong joined an expedition to verify it. The artifacts vanished soon after, dismissed as hoax, or lost to bureaucratic shadow. Yet the description fits ancient accounts too well. Libraries of the gods, archives hidden in the belly of the earth to survive the flood. If they exist, they may hold the last written record of a civilization that foresaw its own end. The earth is old enough to have forgotten more than once. Continents shift, seas advance and retreat, erasing entire epochs. Our present geology tells us that humans have walked the planet for hundreds of thousands of years. Yet we have only 5 millennia of recorded history. What filled that vast gap? Tools of metal found in coal seams millions of years old. Carved stones and strata that predate humanity's accepted emergence. Each anomaly is isolated, unprovable, and yet together they whisper of something larger, an entire prehistory waiting to be reawakened. Even in myth, there are hints of this buried continuity. The Sumerians claim their wisdom came from Eridu, the city of the deep. The Egyptians trace their lineage to Zepte, the first time when gods ruled before the flood. The Dogon people of Mali tell of the Nomo, amphibious teachers who emerge from underground waters to share the secrets of the stars. These stories, scattered yet resonant, suggest not invention, but remembrance, an inherited memory of a world that lived beneath and before the visible one. Modern archaeology, bound by layers of chronology, cannot easily accept the possibility of civilizations older than written time. Yet beneath the rigid framework, unease grows. Satellite scans of the Amazon reveal geometric foundations beneath the jungle. City grids older than any recorded empire. Off the coast of Japan, the Yonauni Monument, whether nature or craft, lies drowned in patterns too deliberate to be accidental. In India's Gulf of Cambi, sonar detects a sunken city aligned with astronomical precision. These are the borderlands of what we are willing to remember. If we imagine for a moment that humanity is not the first to stand where we stand, a strange clarity arises. Civilization may not be a singular event, but a recurring impulse, reborn after each reset. Each iteration inherits fragments from the last. Mathematics, symbols, celestial alignments, and rebuilds without knowing that it rebuilds. The knowledge of the deep world becomes religion, then myth, then nothing. What we call ancient may only be the latest translation of an endless recurrence. Perhaps that is why certain symbols never die. The spiral, the eye, the serpent, all speak of return, of cycles, of rebirth. They are not art, but encryption left by those who knew that language would perish, but geometry would remain. Even now, the stones beneath our feet hold patterns we have not deciphered. They hum faintly with resonance, the echoes of a civilization whose voice has not yet faded entirely. It is easy to think of ourselves as the culmination of evolution, the final inheritors of progress. Yet if all the buried worlds beneath us once thought the same, then progress itself may be the most fragile illusion of all. Every monument we raise, every digital archive we build, will one day sink beneath water or ash, awaiting rediscovery by eyes that have forgotten our name. Still, something endures. Knowledge is a stubborn current. It flows downward, through destruction, gathering in subterranean channels, until the world is ready to remember again. That, perhaps, is what the ancients meant by the civilization beneath us all. Not merely a city of stone, but a continuity of mind, an invisible lineage running through myth, architecture, and DNA. And when we listen closely to the rumble beneath our cities, to the resonance of old temples, to the quiet rhythm of our own blood, perhaps we can still feel it moving. The buried heart of humanity, beating through ages, patient as the earth itself. If that is true, then the question that haunts every age is not what came before us, but what still waits below. And when the surface world falls silent again, will the deep remember our story as we have forgotten theirs?